Hi creators, it's Claire from Springworth and it is a scrap challenge time. So if you remember, if you've been around long enough, I made this jacket, and when I did make the inside, the reversible, I made quite a lot of this strip pieced kind of brickwork, but irregular brickwork. So I've gone through and pulled together the pieces that I have, because like I said, there's quite a lot. So I had this piece just already made, and then I've probably got about 2/3 again, so I think I've got about 9 strips, 8 or 9 strips, which is about from here to here. They are just in strips at this point, because as I cut around the shape I had like bits in all sorts of places, so I disconnected all of those and I have pieced them back together. What am I going to make, I hear you ask? I'm not sure yet. Yeah, so I'm going to piece these back together. I'm going to keep it as 2 pieces at the moment because it would be really easy for me to make one, but I do feel like 2 pieces might lend itself to a project a little bit better. But what that project is, you're just going to have to stick around and find out as I work it out. So I'm probably going to sew these together and then go on the internet and work out what I might need to make. Unsurprisingly, it's better to know what you're going to make before you start making fabric, but luckily I haven't gone too far. I was thinking I would sew together the strips that I have left over to make something pretty much similar to this, attach it on the end and have roughly a square, maybe not quite, but it turns out the project I'm going to make wants something long, 3 times longer than its height, and this is not there. So I'm going to make an Azuma Bukuro bag, which is basically you take a long strip, you fold it into thirds, you sew, and then you get this little triangle handle-ish shaped bag. Sounds very complicated, but I watched Mrs. G's sewing room tutorial. Go check it out, it's actually really helpful. And I was like, oh wow, that's actually really easy. Now my hard part is going to be making it to the 3:1 ratio. So what I'm going to do, and I don't have quite the same number of stripped as this, is I'm going to unpick the end here, and then I'm going to add a strip. So I'm going to add the strips onto the end of these. So I'll pick the longer one on the shorter ones and the shorter ones on the longer ones, and that will give me that length. So this is just under twice as long as it is wide. It's hard to say width when you keep turning the piece around. So this is 1, and then this is just under 2. So I do need to make it kind of half again, longer. So the strips I have are probably too long, so I'll look at trimming some of those off, and then I may need to take down some of that width as well. So it needs to be just kind of 3 times as long plus seam allowances. So that's what I'm going to make. I think it's going to look pretty cool. I've not yet decided if I'm going to put a lining in. It's most likely that I will, but it's probably not going to be a structured bag. It's probably not going to be a quilted bag. I'll probably just keep it that soft, and then I've seen a way that I can put the handles together to make it kind of carryable rather than you just tie it in. So let's get on. So I'm probably just going to take like an inch and a bit. It's going to be pretty rough. Just want to make sure I have the seam allowance, and obviously it needs to be the seam allowance on the shorter piece to be able to add a strip onto the end of each. And then I'll come back and I will piece together the rows. I've ended up with this, which is sewn together fabric and then non-sewn together fabric. I've decided I'm going to make it 16 inches across, which means it needs to be, what's that, 48 inches along. This is about 60, so I'm going to go through now before I sew these two together. Repeat. I'm going to go through a measure about 48 and trim those off, and I'm going to take off, I think it's just one extra line on the original piece. So I think that with those across, that's 17, because I need obviously a seam allowance. So I'll take that one off, and then I'd have to try to piece together 2 additional rows from the offcut, so I'm hoping that there is enough. I have trimmed these to more or less 50 inches, just kind of either going where the seam was or having to cut one. I'm going to now sew these, I'm going to call these ribbons, I'm going to sew these together, and then I will make the last strip, because I am 1 strip short. And looking at the pile, I think I should have heaps. So I'll come back to you when all of these are attached and I have the extra strip on, and then I probably need to iron it before I can think about adding the lining and making it into a bag. Pretty sure I've achieved the correct width and length. I'll just go through now, iron all of these seams out, and then I'm going to have to work out what lining to use and how I'm going to finish the edges. So I could put, I'm not going to put any batting in this. I could do a bias, or I could do a like right sides together, sew around, flip it inside out, whatever that technique's called. Let me know in the comments. So ironing first, because I do, even though I'm not going to quilt it, I do want some flat seams before I put it all together. So I just went ahead and sewed the front, the outside and the lining together. When I cut the patchwork piece, I realised it wasn't square, because one end was 17 inches and one end was 16 inches. So the rolled hem that I thought I was going to do, I'm not going to do. So I just stitched the two together, because it's quite a large piece of fabric, and trying to work with those not connected was just going to be frustrating. So I'm going to go through with a binding, because I do actually have, I think, enough strips left if I bring in some strips of the lining. So I think that would actually look quite cute, a little bit the inside, a little bit the outside. But I'm going to do a different, not a normal quilt binding. So in a normal quilt binding, you go kind of, what's this? Right side out, stitch that along the edge, kind of double turn it over. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the more traditional binding with the sandwich, where the two go into the center, the two edges go into the center, and then this sits on either side of the fabric. I'm just going to do that because this probably really wouldn't be wide enough for the fold in half flip over the fabric version. If you know what the right names for these are, just let me know in the comments. But I do think it will be wide enough for this quarters version. So I will go around, trim the trim the fabric for the bag. I'm pretty sure the white inside is the right size, and then I will put together all of these strips and hopefully be able to go around it all today, and then comes the bag making. So I will come back to you when I have this all bound up to show you how you do the folding to get to that bag shape. So I'll come back to you when this is finished and I'm ready to add the edging. So I made the bias and I loaded it onto here just to keep it nice and folded. So we've got that double fold happening. Well, 3 folds really. And now I'm going to go around and attach that. Good, so I'll go ahead, pin it out nicer, and then I'll come back to you ready for the folding bit. Now then for the bag making part, so I'm going to fold this into thirds. So it's 16 inches wide, so it should be 16 inches times 3 along. So that means it should come about there. And then I'm just going to check that alignment. By folding it back across and making sure it reaches, which it doesn't because it's obviously not perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scooch it along a little bit and see if I can find that third. Threads everywhere, and that's great. So that's nice there and nice and full there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew down one side as close to the edge as I find desirable. So I'm probably just going to hit just inside the binding because it's already quite thick here. That is the first third done. Now we're going to refold, but I'm going to sew along the opposite edge, but I'm going to move out this first piece. So I'm going to do it nice and flat. So I'm going to make sure I know where the corner on that is. So right here. And I'm going to fold that out of the way. I'm going to fold this one across. And then I'm going to sew along this edge. And you can just open that up just to make life a little bit easier in terms of sewing it. So I'll come back to you when this is finished and we basically have a bag. Now we have those two opposite sides sewn to two opposite sides. You're kind of thinking, how is that going to turn into a bag? Well, if you grab the two loose ends, here's a bag. How cute is that? So tomorrow, because I'm quite tired now, I'm going to attach these two pieces together and it'll make a cute bag. So I'll attach those with a bit of something just to give it a bit of stick around for the end of that. There is also apparently a version to box corners. I don't think that would work with my thick bias bandage, but it probably would work if you're making this just with a single kind of piece of fabric or even two. So I'll bring you tomorrow, because I've definitely had enough, the lasting little piece. But for you, that'll be in a moment. So I had some leftover binding and I thought I'd just actually make a handle. So rather than these being closed in and that being more difficult to open, because you can see if they're together, obviously there's less gap, I figured I would use the extra binding. I'll now make a little handle, attaching it to each corner. And that way, much more easy access, also easier to fold. But the traditional would be to tie this over, but I do want kind of an open bag and it will hang a little bit like that. So I'll go ahead and I'll attach the two ends. I did for some reason keep the gap in the middle just to try and avoid too much bulk, but I didn't end up with a nice neat join, but that should be fine to hold what I need. Wasn't intended to be an Instagram style transition, but let's just roll with it. Here is the finished bag. It does tend to fold, just to be aware if you are going to make it this way. It does tend to kind of fold out, and I did make an enormous version to put lots of craft supplies in. So if you can see, it's great, I love it. I should be able to get heaps of supplies in there. Real good use of a large piece of fabric for me. So this was actually quite a lot of that leftover strip piece. So good use for that, and I could definitely see that this could be useful in all sorts of different sizes. For the strap, I just tried to follow the little triangle where it overlapped, just so I didn't have to throw through the bulk of the edge. So now I can find somewhere to hang that up and fill it with stuff. If you've enjoyed this video, I do have some other scrap busting fabric videos. some different project ideas, so it's not always just making a quilt because there's only so many quilts that I can have. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.